Welcome to the Web of Conspiracy. Here is your host, Adam Webb.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of the Web of Conspiracy. I am your host, Adam Webb. It's great to be back with you this week. For those of you who've been listening now for a while, you know that it's a new intro, so I hope everybody enjoys it. Appreciate some feedback. Tell me what you think about it. Nevertheless, great to be back with you this Friday. I have a really cool show, one that I've kind of gotten away from this topic a little bit, so I wanted to kind of get back into talking a little bit more about more ghost type phenomenon, things associated with it. So this week I'm talking about poltergeists. So I kind of been moved away from that a little bit with some of the topics I've done over the last couple months. So I kind of wanted to touch base with it. I know I've touched upon some similar phenomena, some associated phenomena, but I really wanted to get back to that this week. So I think it's pretty cool show, and I hope you enjoy it. Um, a few announcements here before I get started. First off, for those of you who've been listening for a while, you're probably going to get tired of me saying this, but I'm going to keep saying it because I'm floored at the number of people who seem to be discovering the show. It's absolutely mind-boggling. So I just want to welcome all the new listeners. Thanks for listening. I hope you like the show. And also for all of you who keep coming back, hey, I love it. I can't be any more grateful. I'm amazed. I truly am at just how much this show is starting to take off. When I started this, I have to be honest, I didn't really know what to think. I thought, well, I'll have a platform to kind of just talk about some things I want to talk about, try to create an atmosphere when people listen that, hey, there's a lot of different explanations out there, and I think it's important that we give a voice for all of them. And so it's really cool that I find that people, or I guess are like-minded in that respect. So once again, I didn't really have any expectation that, what would happen or how many people would actually listen to the show. So it's absolutely amazing to me to see just how many people now are listening to the show, and every week the numbers grow. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing, and I owe all of you listening because I didn't expect this. So thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for coming back, and as this show continues to grow, I hope to be able to continue to do more and more with this. Um, Obviously, as I said before, a lot of the things that I do, this is just one thing that I sort of started as a hobby, something that I really didn't know what to expect of, and it's kind of starting to grow a little bit in a way that I didn't expect. So it's awesome, and I'm enjoying it, and I hope everybody else is enjoying it. And as this thing grows, hopefully I can continue to do more and take the show into some directions that I've had ultimately goaled for a while. And and let me just say that I haven't been able to do that without you listening. Your listening has sort of been the motivation for me over the months. With starting this show, leaving the other show that I had on another network, and then starting this here in the midst of battling with cancer and all the surgeries, and at one point, I almost thought about stopping the show completely. That I was just going to leave the other network and I wasn't going to do a show. I was just going to take all the downtime and I was going to be done and maybe never come back to it. And I decided that no, I really felt like there was a need for me to do the show, not only for my own sanity, but for others who really enjoyed talking about listening to these topics and having some sort of, you know, looking at different viewpoints, looking at all the different viewpoints in some of these topics. So I kind of felt like there was a place for the show, and it would seem that there is. So once again, thank you to everybody who continues to listen to the show. It really is. It's just completely surprises me every week to see. So once again, thank you, both new and old listeners. I appreciate all of your support over the last few months with everything. So um, a couple other announcements, and I do this quite a bit too. But if you haven't checked out the show's social media, the show's on Facebook, the Web of Conspiracy. It's on Twitter, Web of Conspiracy, Google Plus as well. Um, and of course I have a website set up. I actually did a little bit of updating to it. I try to update certainly with the archived shows. I have a section there you can listen to all the shows that I have, as well as a designated section for the latest shows, the newest shows that come out. Um, that's where I tend to make a lot of my announcements about the show, if there's changes or things of that nature, topics, things like that. Um, those are that's what I do when rather than creating a track and then broadcasting it and then people listening to an announcement. But so that's where I tend to keep things updated on the show. So um, like it, follow it, all those wonderful things. And then, feel free to give me feedback too. I'm more than welcome to that. The email address, if you have any questions, comments about the show, is webofconspiracy@gmail.com. I love the feedback, and I've gotten some emails from listeners, and I appreciate all the feedback that I can get in terms of what could be done to improve the show, as well as what you like about the show, because that feeds my ego. So, at any rate, check all those out. And then for those of you who, I don't know, it seems like a lot of you listen through the iTunes downloads, but the show's also available on Stitcher, and there does seem to be a few people listening there. If you have Stitcher, check us out on Stitcher. The other thing too, with iTunes and with Stitcher is, um, if you have questions, you have comments, or you have an opinion about the show, feel free to write a review on both Stitcher and the iTunes. Um, those reviews certainly help the show, help with the rankings of the show, and help get the show more exposure. So that would be the thing I would ask of those of you who've been listening for a while, to feel free to put reviews out there. Uh, I greatly appreciate it, and not to mention, I really do value uh, constructive criticism where at all possible. Don't just tell me I suck. Tell me how I suck. Okay. All right. So that being said, the topic of today's show, poltergeists. Now, for many of us who certainly grew up in the 80s, and so alive in the 80s, you remember the iconic poltergeist movies, uh, Carol Ann, Don't Go Into the Light, and all those wonderful little tidbits. It was a compelling movie, certainly the first one, even the second one. After that, I don't know. But I certainly enjoyed the first two movies. Now, those movies sort of popularized the idea of the poltergeist. For those of you who aren't German experts, or are unfamiliar with poltergeist, the word poltergeist is a German word, and it literally means noisy spirit. Um, Essentially, the associated phenomena, the things that poltergeists are most known for, are making lots of racket, lots of noise. Um, there seems to be a lot of in homes that people claim that there's poltergeist activity. There's a lot of knocking on walls and floors and all over the home, and there's some other strange phenomena as well, not just noise making, but lots of other physical manifestations that are often associated with poltergeist phenomena. You have objects that will, be in one room, they'll disappear, and then you left something in one room, and then 10 minutes later you go into that room, it's gone, and then you go to another room and it's in there, and nobody else is there, nobody else moved it. It seemed to have moved itself, so to speak. So that is another associated phenomenon with poltergeist activity. Another one that's often reported are electrical disturbances and light disturbances, where electricity will kind of fluctuate, things will turn themselves on or turn themselves off on their own, TVs, radios, lights will flicker, come on and off on their own as well. Um, Other appliances, as I mentioned, will be affected. Another interesting piece of this is that oftentimes devices that are broken, maybe they haven't worked, either don't have power or have some sort of mechanical issue. In houses where this poltergeist activity, these objects will often work again, or they'll work for a short period of time. Something will more or less activate these devices and make them work. So that's often a associated phenomenon with the poltergeist activity. Um, Another one, and this is one that, for those who watch the Poltergeist movies, certainly will seem to remember is the furniture moving, objects being moved, or objects and furnitures, pieces of furniture being stacked upon each other. For those of you who go to the show's website, in the news section, I had previewed the Poltergeist episode here, and I posted a picture from one of the Poltergeist cases that I'm going to be discussing today, and that's the Enfield Poltergeist. Now that picture is pretty remarkable. As if you go on the website and check it out under the news section, um, the way that these pieces of furniture were stacked, it's almost surreal. It's hard to believe um, that something like that could happen. So, at any rate, the the phenomena has a number of other things. One other more of the common uh, attributes are these strange scents and odors. Odors that are out of place in your home. For instance, say you're in a home that nobody smokes in the home, yet you'll suddenly smell cigar smoke or cigarette smoke, and there won't be anybody outside, nobody around, just this scent suddenly appears. Um, that kind of phenomenon is often reported in other activity as well, but this is also associated with poltergeist activity. Now, some of the more, mm, I guess you would say, rare parts of the poltergeist phenomenon are objects levitating in front of individuals and then being thrown at them. Now, this does happen in some cases. It doesn't occur in all reported cases of poltergeist activity, but it does occur in some, and certainly the more severe cases. People report about having objects thrown at them or thrown in their general direction from across the room. So kind of intense. I can be honest and say that I've never had that happen to me, so I'm not exactly sure that how I would react to something flying across the room at my head. But nevertheless, there are a number of people who reported this kind of activity happening to them. Now, the most rare and perhaps the scariest of the phenomenon are the physical attacks. Now, as I said, this is the most rare of all of the poltergeist activity. It does not happen to everybody that has poltergeist activity in their home, but it does happen to a few, and it does seem to happen in certainly some of the most infamous cases of poltergeist activity. These physical attacks are where people will report being smacked. Witnesses will actually witness this activity. They'll hear what sounds like the individual being slapped or smacked, and then shortly thereafter, marks will appear. So it will look as if though someone has actually physically been struck by an unknown force, and marks will be left behind from this. Not only the smacking and the hitting, but also scratching. People report having scratches in their back, long, deep scratches that will, in some occasions, draw blood. Um, Very severe attacks. They'll have the markings of as though like some type of hand had gone across their body in whatever particular spot that they were scratched. Um, Obviously, it's rare, fortunately, because that is a pretty intense experience for those who have undergone this type of activity. And this is not something that certainly most people would want to experience. Nevertheless, in the worst and most severe poltergeist cases, this kind of activity does in fact happen. Uh, and That'll be evident in the cases that I'm about to go over here with you. I don't know personally anybody who's had a poltergeist experience, and to me, it's a fascinating phenomenon, and I would love to be able to if anybody listening to the show has either had a poltergeist experience or has known somebody who has, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear about the story. I think it's a fascinating phenomenon. And after I go over some of these examples, I'll get into some of the suspected causes of the poltergeist phenomenon. But nevertheless, if anybody has had an experience or has known anybody who has, I would absolutely love to be able, I'd love to get some of that info. I'd love to hear about it. just shoot me an email, webofconspiracy@gmail.com. I'd love to hear more about it. Personally, I find this to be fascinating, um, as well as in many cases pretty intense and frightening for most, but certainly in the severe cases. Now, the first case, one I had spoke about a little bit ago that I'm going to talk about, uh, surrounded a young a young girl named Janet Hodgson, and this occurred in Enfield, England, in 1977. She was 11 years old. Her mother, Peggy Hodgson, and her three other siblings had moved into a new home. Uh, Now, shortly thereafter, moving into this home, they started having some strange phenomena occurring. It started with knockings and poundings, right, as I had mentioned before, hearing on the walls and the floor, and then uh, at at night their beds would shake violently. Uh, Furniture, as I said before, would be moved across rooms, and at first, there was some suspicion that this activity was being done by Janet because it seemed to revolve around her. Wherever she was, everything seemed to kind of revolve around the 11-year-old Janet Hodgson. Now, at this point, things began to intensify. Toys and Christmas tree ornaments, things like that, were thrown in the air. Now, the bed shaking was something, but at this point, the beds moved beyond that and begin to levitate, where they literally levitated off of the ground. And without any explanation at all. Another interesting uh, little piece of phenomena that occurred in this particular poltergeist case was that objects would get hot to the touch. Just random objects. You go to pick it up, and it would literally be as if though it had been in the oven baking at 400 degrees for half an hour, and it would burn the hands to the touch. Now, one of the most creepy um, parts of this phenomenon is that Janet, at one point, as the activity got at its most intense, began having an old man's voice come through her. At least that's the reports on this, is that this mysterious voice that wasn't hers began to talk through her. Now, I mean, I don't know if anybody has ever had any kind of experience like that at all, um, but nevertheless, it is. I can't even imagine hearing an old man's voice come out of a 11-year-old girl's body. But in this particular case, it was documented that this actually occurred. Now, um, the thing that I really wanted to emphasize is that if you're interested in learning more about this particular case, there is actually, in both of these cases, there are books that have been written about both of the cases. I'm going to detail, but the book about the Enfield Poltergeist case is called "This House is Haunted." Now, I'm not sure the availability on that. I haven't checked out all of the info on that yet. Um, but nevertheless, the most peculiar part of all this activity for young Janet was that it just eventually just stopped one day without explanation, without any kind of other attempted, in terms of intervention. There were people who investigated, and certainly that's how the book was written. But there was, I mean, there's no real explanation as to why this happened. No one knows why it happened in terms of, you know, why it just stopped. There wasn't as if though a great deal of effort was made into trying to exercise whatever may have been there. It just stopped. Now, the next case, in many ways, to me, seems a little more intense. Now, while they share a lot of similarities, there's some difference in activity with this particular case. This next case revolves around a young woman named Esther Cox, 19 years old, and she was living in Amherst, Nova Scotia. Now, she was living with her sister and brother-in-law and their children. in a home, in a private family home. Now, with her, there seemed to be a trigger that occurred. Um, Unfortunately, she had been attacked and nearly raped by an acquaintance shortly after living in this home. Now, up to that point, there had never been any issues until after this rape, strange activity, or attempted rape, strange activity began. Um, they started hearing the noises again. Right? The whole idea of the poltergeist is that it's a noisy spirit. So the activity seems to first manifest as these strange noises, the knockings, the poundings, all that kind of thing began. And then at night, one night, she had something what she believed to be crawling in bed with her. It was moving the sheets. Um, and when she screamed and yelled, and her family came in, and where everyone was looking, searching, couldn't find anything. Initially, it was attributed to, oh, perhaps it was just a mouse, something of that nature. Now, the following night, Esther became ill. She started feeling very sick, didn't feel well, and she went to bed early that night. Now, she woke up screaming and yelling that she was going to explode. It was literally something to that effect of what she had said. Her skin had turned bright red and was swelled up. Her face, the eyes were bulging. She was burning up. She was sweating. She was extremely hot, as if though she had some sort of incredibly intense fever. She was saying she couldn't breathe. She couldn't get air. She was in extreme pain and cried. Now, the most interesting thing here is that as the family's trying to console her, trying to figure out, they're going to take her to the hospital, what was happening, four loud bangs erupted from inside the room, and what sounded like came from under her bed. Now, upon those four loud bangs occurring, the symptoms almost immediately subsided, and she fell into a very deep sleep. A very deep sleep. As soon as those loud bangs occurred, all those physical manifestations that were occurring to Esther abruptly stopped. Now, the family, watching, this activity occurring, not, and they wound up bringing in a doctor, Doctor, bear with even the pronunciation, Doctor Karit, who came in and to see what was going on with her. And so the doctor had come in and was examining her, and he began to see some very creepy phenomena occurring. It would appear as if though the pillow under Esther was moving. There was no other hands, nothing like that, but it looked as if though something was moving the pillow from underneath. And then he began to hear the loud bangs again. And at that point, shortly thereafter, her clothes were removed from her body and flung across the room. And then he begins to hear what sounds like this scratching noise, as if something was scratching into the plaster of the walls. And he looks around and happens to look to the ceiling, and he sees that there are distinct letters that were etching themselves in the wall. He could watch these letters being formed right before his very eyes. And according to the reports, he claimed that the words that he saw etched into the ceiling were, Esther Cox, you are mine to kill. Pretty intense. Now, he still continued. I mean, I'll give this doctor credit, man. Brave dude, because he did not back down. He continued to attend to her bedside and watch her health and try to help her as best he could. And at that point, going into the following day, he's getting potatoes thrown at him, begins hearing more of the strange noises, not really sure what's going on. just all kinds of strange activity. And at that point, things began to escalate even further. Um, Unexplained fires began to erupt. Knives and forks were being thrown and stuck into woodwork. Lit matches were materialized out of nowhere and dropped on the beds. Of course, furniture flipping itself, slamming into walls, loud slaps. Okay, and we talked about this a little bit ago. The loud slaps were heard, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you could see what it looked like Esther being smacked in the face. And perhaps one of the scariest parts of this story was that a pocket knife had been removed from the hand of somebody in the home and was flung and lodged into Esther's back. And she was stabbed by this mysterious force that literally took this pocket knife right out of somebody's hand. Now, at this point, Esther, um, she tried everything to try to get this phenomenon to stop. Now, she was not, feeling that fever anymore and all that she was having, but she had gone to a Baptist church service, was sitting in the church, and everything was occurring in the church at that point. There was the knockings, and everything grew louder, and the noises grew louder during the sermon. And Esther, knowing that she was the cause of this, left. And she, at that point, knew that she had to get away from her family. She felt as if, though, she was going to be a threat to the rest of her family members, her nieces and nephews that were living there with them, she was living with, and she did not want to cause that kind of a problem. So, and not to mention, there was fear that the owner of the home would evict her family because they were renting the home. So she went out and went out on her own, and she had found work at a nearby farm. Now, at that point, this activity, it seemed to have followed her once again, because for some reason the barn on this farm burned to the ground, and the farmer believed that Esther was responsible for this, and he had notified the authorities. She wound up being arrested for arson, and she was convicted and sentenced to 4 months in jail. Now, as it turned out, this activity seemed to cease while she was incarcerated. Now, she wound up only serving 1 month of this sentence. And while it's unfortunate that this happened, and certainly you could argue that maybe, certainly we don't have all the facts. It would seem as if, though, based on her history, that perhaps she was not ultimately responsible for this fire erupting in the barn, that it would be associated with whatever these entities were, or this phenomena that was occurring around her. And but nevertheless, she wound up serving this month in prison, in jail. Now, the weird thing about this was that when she was released from jail, this poltergeist activity just stopped. It's faded away. There were some little things here and there, but eventually just completely stopped on its own. And there's a little bit of further story on her. She eventually would go on to be married twice, and she died at the age of 53. And for those of you who are more interested in getting some of the details and a little bit more story about Esther Cox, there's a book written on this that was entitled The Great Amherst Mystery, obviously named after Amherst, Nova Scotia, where this took place. So once again, both of these cases, there's this really crazy phenomenon that's occurring that just seems to stop for what appears to be no real solid apparent reason. The activity just ceases. And so that leads to the next question. What causes poltergeist activity? Well, there seems to be a strong belief that that poltergeist activity is either centered around malevolent ghosts and spirits, or some sort of demonic force, some sort of force that just intends for nothing but true evil. It's just pure evil and just torment individuals. And certainly in the case of Esther Cox, that would be the case. She was incredibly tormented. I cannot imagine going through the experiences that she went through. So for many people, certainly those who investigate paranormal activity on a regular basis, there's a belief that there is some sort of entity that's attached to this individual, that they are feeding upon its energy somehow, and using it and possessing this entity for its the entity's possessing the individual for its own purposes. Now, there's also another school of thought. Um, And this one is an intriguing one to me. And for those of you who read the Stephen King book Carrie or watched the movie, you'll recognize psychokinetic ability. Now, there are those who believe that these are individuals where this activity seems to be centered around, that they're actually the ones that are manifesting the phenomenon, that they have somehow, some way, have this psychokinesis, this ability to physically alter their environment just by thinking about it, or even not thinking about it, just having this ability and not knowing how to control it or master it or handle it. Now, this theory revolves around how the activity is centered around younger people. And interestingly enough, you'll note, certainly in the case of Esther Cox, as in many other cases, that there is some sort of stressful or traumatic experience that occurs to the individual, and then that experience seems to be the trigger point for activity. In the case of Esther Cox, it was the assault and attempted rape by the acquaintance that seemed to start the activity. In the case of young Janet Hodgson, 11 years old, this seems to be another common situation. She was going through puberty, and it would seem that young children that are entering puberty seem to have this phenomenon occurring around them. So many researchers are beginning to look at the possibility that this activity is really being manifested by individuals who are going through incredibly traumatic experiences and do not have a way of controlling it, mastering it, don't realize that they have this kind of ability. And it begins to manifest in a number of strange and unusual ways that they can't seem to really understand, and in many respects winds up lashing back out at them. Now, to me, this seems to be an incredibly plausible theory if you believe that people have psychokinetic ability. Um, while I will say this, the Esther Cox case, well, not so much the Esther Cox case, but the Janet Hodgson case, where the old man's voice came through her, that is one that I'm unsure of as being something that we could attribute to psychokinetic ability. Between these two cases, it would seem to me that Janet Hodgson's experience is perhaps a little more related to some sort of spirit, malevolent spirit, or even perhaps demonic possession. Uh, the old man voice, that is not a common, that is an incredibly rare uh, occurrence in a poltergeist phenomenon, which would lead me to believe that perhaps that this is something that's being created and controlled by an entity. Now, Esther Cox, now granted, right, we have this etching in the ceiling, right? Esther Cox, you are mine to kill. So that makes you wonder, well, perhaps that there's some sort of force and entity controlling there. And perhaps it is. I'm not a paranormal, I don't do field research. I can't say that I've done that. Um, what research I've come across, uh, and I try to do my best to make interpretations based on that. So I can't say definitively that these cases are one or the other. Based on what I have found, um, the Esther Cox case is one that I'm not so certain of either. I think that one may be more attributed to psychokinetic ability. Now, of course, there's the Esther Cox, you are mine to kill. Okay. So perhaps there is some sort of demonic force that wrote that. However, I would I would take a moment and argue that that is also a manifestation of the psychokinetic ability. And let me explain this. I'm not a psychiatrist and I'm not going to pretend to be one. But when someone is a rape survivor or they've been nearly raped, they there seems to be it's an overwhelming traumatic experience, and there's an awful lot of strange emotions that go into it, including guilt and anger and things of this nature. There's I cannot help but shake the thought that perhaps Esther was internalizing this anger and blaming herself for what had happened, and was punishing herself in many respects. And the reason that I highlight the punishing herself is, note when the activity ended. The activity ended after she came out of jail, when she was released from jail. So perhaps going to jail, being punished for this, was cathartic enough for her that she was able to move on and forgive herself, that she received adequate punishment for what she had done. And as a result of she let go of the anger and the guilt and all those associated feelings, and no longer felt the need to punish herself. She had been punished. She had been punished enough. Now, I haven't read the book, so perhaps that theory is articulated there. I don't know. But nevertheless, the Esther Cox case would lead me to believe that this is someone who's a classic traumatic event survivor who's carrying a lot of guilt and a lot of anger at themselves. And once she was disciplined in this weird, twisted way, she could release all of that energy, release all that anger, all of that guilt, and the activity stopped. Now, as I said, perhaps there is something else going on there, that maybe there is some sort of other malevolent spirit. But in the Esther Cox case, it would seem to me that that is a great candidate for the psychokinesis being the real manifestation of the phenomenon. Nevertheless, both of these cases are very intriguing. And as we examine poltergeist phenomenon going forward, I know that many researchers now believe that it is certainly a situation of this unknown ability that manifests itself in people after traumatic situations or life-changing circumstances. Nevertheless, as I said with the Janet Hodgins case, that would seem to me, if I were to label anything something that's a result of malevolent spirits or demons, that would to me seem to be a little bit more of a possibility, just because of the voice phenomenon. Not as I said, that's an opinion. Um, Feel free to create your own. I mean, these cases are all over the internet, and as I said, there's books written on both of them. Uh, Check it out and judge for yourself. Um, but poltergeist phenomenon is something that's been occurring for hundreds of years, has a long history, and it's something that we're just really getting into understanding and trying to explain. And in any case, it's a difficult experience for those who the activity centers around, regardless of where the origin is. Um, Nevertheless, it would seem that there seems to be a lot of movement in the field that this really is something that's more psychokinetic. So, okay, well, that's what I have for the show for today. Now, I had mentioned last week, I will not be broadcasting a show next week. After much debate and deciding I'm going to actually give myself a week off. I've been at this now for a few months straight, and I could use a little bit of a break. So I'm going to take a week off, recharge, regroup. I've got some really cool topics I'm going to be talking about going forward. I'm going to talk about in the coming weeks. I'm going to talk about transhumanism, um, the idea of molding man and machine. I'm going to talk about string theory. Now, for those of you who listened to the old show before, you know that I talked about it once before, but I'm going to retouch on string theory and why it matters in the paranormal world, why it's important, and why we need to try to have some sort of understanding of what string theory is. So those are just a couple of topics. I'm also Bermuda Triangle. There's a few that I've got in the works, so I'm going to be laying that all out here in the coming weeks. Once again, thank you to everybody for listening to the show. I appreciate it. And have a great week next week. And then I will be back with you here in 2 weeks. Uh, have a good one.